These days, one of the most intense, ongoing debates that I have with my husband is about the definition of friendship. For me, a friend is someone I see regularly, someone I know quite deeply, someone with whom I probably share some inside jokes, someone who I feel like I can go to as my full true self and who can come to me as their full true self. Whereas for my husband, friendship is more just like having an extended network of people with whom you can go for a drink occasionally. And it doesn't matter to him so much if you don't see your friends for like several months. I've even told him, like, I don't think you have any friends. And like, okay, I do feel bad about that one. But the truth is, like, I feel like at the end of the day, both of us are right. We're just describing different types of friendships. I'm describing a friendship that's really close and deep, and he's describing more of a casual type of friendship. And both have their place and both are important. That also does not stop these debates from getting fairly contentious sometimes, as evidenced by the fact that I told him that I don't think he has any friends. And why do they get contentious? Well, because I make them contentious, because I have a vested interest in proving to him that he needs to handle friendships differently. And why does he need to handle friendships differently? Well, for me, and to help me curb the loneliness that I've been feeling. Now, I even hate to call it loneliness because it does seem like there's some shame in even admitting to being lonely, like it's some kind of personal failing, or like I should just buck up and deal with it. I don't know, but I'm not. And so like the context is, though, that in the past couple of years since I moved from New York back to London, and like I say back to because I've lived in London before for several years and had friends in London, like had substantial friend groups in London. Well, not substantial friend groups, but like I had like several friends. Like I was not lonely in the past. Whereas like in coming back and in trying to reestablish myself in London, like, oh wow, something changed. And I think a few things did change, like in the 4 years that I was away. Like the pandemic happened, unfortunately. And also I turned 30 in that time, and as did many people I know. And with that came the influx of children into people's lives. And so that cut out a lot of potential friends. And so I come back to this city where I used to feel myself very much part of the world. And suddenly I'm like, oh, wait, maybe I'm not part of the world anymore. And then I look at my Londoner husband with his established, extensive network of people he knows, but oftentimes just people he like kind of will just meet up with for a drink from time to time and doesn't really see super regularly. And I'm like, you got to see these people more so that I can draw from this group that you know, so I can build my own friend group. You need to see them more. And then, you know, he doesn't act on it as quickly as I want him to. And then I tell him he has no friends. And then I also have no friends. And the thing is, I think a lot of people feel exactly the same way. Because haven't you heard that we're in a loneliness epidemic? And this epidemic is happening for so many reasons. When I look at reasons why, naturally, a lot of them begin with the pandemic, of course. And then what the pandemic did, though, in a very long-term way, was it put a lot of people into a situation of remote work. And of course, there are a lot of benefits of remote work. Like, I think it can be a great thing. I'm a remote worker myself. It gives me a lot of flexibility in terms of my location. I would not trade it for the world, but it can be quite lonely, quite isolating when it's just you in your computer. Yeah, basically. Anyway, though, remote work then, it also, though, led to the decline of work friendships, after work drinks. It led people to turn much more to their phones, to other online media for their entertainment, for their sense of social connection, for their social interaction. And as they do this, as they turn more online, of course, you fall out of practice in talking to actual people in actual reality. But then it's not only about that. It's also about economic inequality. Like, if you are making less money, you are more likely statistically to be lonelier, according to a 2023 Gallup poll research that found that people earning under $24,000 per year were lonelier than people earning more money. if we get into why this is happening, of course, the logic follows that if you make less money, you have less choice in where you live. So you might have to move around a lot to find more affordable accommodation. You might have to relocate to chase work opportunities. You might have to live far away from your pre-existing social networks, from your family, from your friends of the past. Even if you live in a city, and this is, obviously my particular area of expertise as the person who spent all those years in London and New York, even if you do live in a city, and even if a lot of your technical friends, people you could refer to within my husband's definition of friendship as friends, you find that a lot of people are just living where they can afford to live. And this often puts them in far away, almost suburban areas. It can take quite a while to travel from one person's place to another. You don't necessarily want to invite people over because you're very cognizant of the fact that, I'm asking them to ride a train for an hour, and is that really respectful? And maybe we should just meet in the middle. But then when you meet in the middle, well, guess what? You have to pay for prices of drinks or food or whatever you're getting. And that adds up whew. Going back to my time in New York, it just was every night that I would be I'm going to go out, I would end up spending at least $100 every time. So yeah, life is expensive. People cannot live where they potentially desire to live, and fundamentally people cannot live close to their friends. And so it leads to a situation where people perhaps have friends, but those friends are very far flung. You don't see them. And so we're not really getting the kind of friendships that align with my personal definition of friendship, where you have to see each other regularly as a prerequisite of knowing each other deeply and of developing those inside jokes that really, make friendship worth having. And then finally, as we assess the loneliness epidemic, I think life stage is also something to really consider here. And now, according to the data, of course, loneliness can ebb and flow throughout your life. When you're very young, you might not feel very lonely because you're surrounded by other people of a similar life stage to you. So this could be if you are in school, of course, you have your classmates who are with you every day. You go through the stages of life with them up until a point where you graduate from whatever the highest level of education you choose to attain is, and then you graduate, and then you get lonely. You might get a job that requires you to move somewhere far away from where your family is or where your friends are or where you've lived before. And you might not mean to fall out of touch with your friends, but it just kind of happens because you don't have that regularity of contact. And then also, if you take the life stage that I particularly am in, namely the in my 30s, life in my 30s. It's so depressing though. If you're in this stage of your life, this 30s stage of your life, it's another period of sometimes intense loneliness according to the data. And as I was reading this data, preparing to talk about this, I actually felt some of the resentment that I feel towards the parents of young children in my life, because, in my opinion, oh no, they make me more lonely because they're not available to hang out anymore because they're caring for their children and working and trying to afford costs of raising children and childcare. And I'm but you don't want to go to the bar anymore. So boring. And I actually, though, I started to feel empathy or sympathy, maybe more sympathy than empathy, because I don't actually know exactly how it feels to have a child, but I did start to feel bad for them, thinking okay, it's rough. It must be rough out there. And I'm sorry for resenting you. I understand that early parenthood can be a lonely stage, as can watching everyone around you have kids be a lonely stage. Now that we've talked about the fact that I'm potentially lonely because of my life circumstances, and lots of other people are also lonely because of their life circumstances, well, I look at this and I'm yeah, pretty bleak. I don't necessarily want to prove that people are lonely because I believe that they are, and that's enough. What I want to ask is why. If we as a society understand that we are lonely, and if we as a society agree that loneliness is not a desirable state of being, and we understand what is making us lonely, then why do we not do anything about it? So now we come to the really exciting part of this story, which is me, my own endless analyses of my personal situation. Now, here's the thing about me and friendship. And the thing about me and friendship is that I am not the most outgoing person in the world, but I'm also not the least outgoing person in the world. I'm like kind of somewhere in the middle of outgoing. Like, I definitely will talk to you and I will be pretty open if I do talk to you. And I'm not afraid of small talk. I'm not afraid of talking to strangers, really. What I am afraid of sometimes is like talking in like small groups of like 5 or more people. Even like 3 or more people can be really intimidating, where it's like you have to like jump in with like something to say to the group and like you're worried about like every group member's reaction to you. That's what I don't really like, but I'm like perfectly fine with like other forms of talking to people. So I'm not terrified of social interaction is what I'm trying to say. And also, I have never really had trouble making friends or maintaining friends for much of my life. Like, I've had friends, like when I was growing up, I had a small circle of closer friends, as well as a wider circle of friendly acquaintances. This was also the case in college, where I had like a few really close, like best friends type of friends. And then I had like my wider network of people I would go to parties with and stuff. And like both of those friendships were very fulfilling and validating, and I enjoyed it. And I look back on that time as really the golden age of friendship. And then I graduated from college, and as predicted, as one would expect, friendship did change. I think friendship changes for many people, unless you happen to be one of those lucky few who just moves to, I don't know, a city with all of your college friends, and you just like maintain that dynamic forever. Like that would be the dream. Like, I wish I could have done that, but it just like it wasn't really an option. Like, it just no one did that. Like, my extended friend group did not do that in graduating from college. So whatever. Like, I moved away from my college town, and I moved to London, and I still had friends in London. I met friends through jobs, through studying. I also like met friends by like dating, actually. Like, sometimes I date someone and it's like, oh, this isn't really romantic, but we did actually genuinely stay friends in like at least one case. And I was like, it was nice. It was like nice. People were still occasionally hosting parties, and people were still by and large up to meet up to go out for a drink after work, like up for doing something, getting outside and living in the world together. It was nice. It was nice. But then in the past, let's say 4 or so years, 4 to 5 years, I think, for me personally, with like the exact details of my personal situation. But in the last 4 to 5 years, though, things really did start to change. Like, suddenly I started to notice that the number of social engagements that I got invited to really started to drop off. Like, there was not a lot going on for years. And I think that was directly prompted by the pandemic. I think that was the reason why like things kind of stopped happening. But then after people started hanging out again, like in general in society, well, like the groups I was a part of really didn't start hanging out again. And I think this is like in many cases because people just had kids. Like, a lot of people had kids, and so then no one wanted to hang out anymore. Like, I think that's genuinely why. But like, it did just make for a lonely time. And I felt for the first time, and here is my definition of loneliness, I felt that I wanted social connection and social contact that I just could not seem to achieve. And my only consolation in all of this is just knowing that, well, at least I'm not alone.
Growing up, nobody warned me that in your mid to late 20s, it's insanely hard to make friends. I don't know if it's like that for guys, but for girls, it's definitely freaking hard. If you don't have those lifelong, childhood friends, or even friends that like you build a relationship in college or like whatever, if you grow distant from them and you like don't talk to them anymore, finding new friends when you're at this age is insanely hard.
And he was like, basically he's like, I'm not making any friends. And I thought that I would make friends, and I've been trying to make friends, but nobody seems to want to be friends or hang out. Everybody seems to be in their own space.
Maybe the male loneliness epidemic should smile more. Maybe the male loneliness epidemic should try volunteering. Ooh, or a cooking class?
And so it seems we've found ourselves in a cultural moment where nobody much is going out, nobody much is trying to make friends, to establish meaningful long-term social connections. And if people are going out, they're not really talking to anyone new. Like, they're not looking to meet a new person and have their life changed by this amazing new friend. No, they're just not gonna, they're not gonna talk to you in the first place. It's not gonna happen. And so, like, why? Like, why? And does anyone like this? Does anyone like this at all? Like, does this make anyone happy? Truly? A Substack essay called The Mainstreaming of Loserdom gives a glimpse into this cultural moment, if you will. And the key point of this essay, essentially, is that across social media, there's this glorification of the idea of having no hobbies, of spending your time just rotting in your bed, staying home. Netflix is your only companion. You don't have any friends. You don't have any interests. You just like to be on your phone. And it's one of those things where a lot of this, of course, is a joke. And yet, like, with any good joke, it's a joke that's funny because we know deep down that it is true. In this essay, the author says, it feels like a psyop. The people who are out partying aren't online, so the online folks have coordinated this mass push to make us believe partying is bad and staying home is the solution. And this really got me thinking about the feedback loop, if you will, of loneliness. And so when you start to feel lonely, whether it's because you've moved to a new place and you don't really know anyone there, or you've started a new job, or maybe you're unemployed and suddenly you don't have that same level of contact with the world that you had before. Well, when you find yourself in this situation, it's very easy to start to turn to your phone for social connection. And the loneliness just starts to reinforce itself, but it almost doesn't feel exactly like loneliness anymore. It almost starts to feel like something that everyone else is doing too. Everyone is just doing this time on their phones. And you really start to become an island unto yourself, but you don't completely believe it because you think, well, I am connected still, right? And also, this is where online wellness culture rears its sinister head. And in this time that you're spending online alone, no input but what the algorithms feed you, you start seeing these other people with these interesting lives. You start to reflect on your own life and you start to think, well, this situation could be improved upon. And then you start to receive more content insidiously that takes the form of, hey, you can perfect your life. Here's a meditation practice that will help you perfect your life. Or here are the foods that are making you inflamed and that are making your life worse through the inflammation. Cut them out. Here are the supplements you can take to optimize your body and therefore optimize yourself, optimize your life. In a video on the crisis of Gen Z friendships, Jordan Teresa points out that this wellness culture, this online wellness culture, this sobriety culture, which, ultimately is about, kind of just really looking good, also becomes a justification for not going out. And then closely connected to this wellness culture, this self-optimization culture, is also a sort of relationship optimization culture, a desire to optimize the relationships that you already have, to cut out the friendships that you believe are not serving you, to stop doing favors for people, to establish your boundaries, to apply the best therapy speak language to yourself and the way you interact with others, because that will change your life and make it better. I'm no hater of boundaries. In fact, I'm a proponent of boundaries when it comes to the boundaries that you set with work. I think we should establish all the boundaries in the world when it comes to our work lives. And I think, in fact, I would even go so far as to say that our collective inability to establish effective boundaries with our workplaces, to take on what they ask of us, no matter what it is, to work for some reason, 8-hour days, 5 days a week, like why? Our inability to establish these effective boundaries and to say, hey, we don't actually need to be working this much, like there is simply not that much work to be done, and also we don't have to grow endlessly. Our inability to say that has led to a situation where we feel that instead we need to establish boundaries with that which makes our lives meaningful, namely our friendships. We end up in states of such overwhelm where something needs to be cut, and what ends up being cut is often our social ties. This is what we cut instead of like the, 8-hour workday. We instead are like, oh my God, I'm so tired. I just don't have time for my friends. Oh, I'm just establishing boundaries. I'm just like assessing which friendships are worthwhile and which ones are not. And it's like, oh, stop. Oh, stop. Just stop. Just work less and then you have more time for people. And like, to go any deeper, I would suggest that this is all by design. We've all been collectively conditioned to believe that our work can give us purpose and that it is the one thing that can truly give us purpose, and that we need to put all of our time and energy and attention into it, that it should be the centerpiece of our lives, rather than our families or our relationships, our friendships. And as you think about all this boundaries talk, all this therapy speak applied to our relationships, what does it really come down to but an act of justifying our own isolation? And all the while, I'm just left wondering why this culture has taken hold and how it reinforces itself. As I consume all this content about the decline of parties and clubbing and leaving the house in general, I think about, well, I should just do something about it. And then, though, in the deepest pits of my being, I feel this visceral reluctance to do anything about my situation. And it doesn't quite make sense. It's like, why not? Again, why, if I understand my situation, do I keep perpetuating it? If I understand this is a situation that makes me unhappy, why can I not simply put an end to it? And as I contemplate this, beneath my rational, sensible desire to take charge of my situation is, I think, a deep undercurrent of what I can only call fear. It's not social anxiety, though. It's not fear of going out and being awkward. It's something quite different. It's more of a fear of backsliding on whatever personal progress I might have made on myself in the last several years. A fear of having to let up on my self-improvement projects because, well, going out and spending more time socializing will take away from all of the pursuit of my goals and all of the rigid benchmarks for implementation of my goals that I've set for myself. And it's really a fear that if I go and start interacting in the world in a more meaningful way, that it will have consequences that are beyond my control, that it might lead me to a place where I've lost my progress, where I'm not as successful as I hoped to be. It's the optimization culture. It's the self-optimization culture, for one, that is absolutely holding me back and that is inspiring this deep, deep fear in me when it comes to the prospect of going out. Because on one level, it is like, oh no, the pursuit of my personal goals, how will I maintain it if I am going and seeing people in a social way several times a week without any other purpose but socializing. What will I do? How will I keep up? What if I get drunk or I get a bad night of sleep and then I'm really tired the next day and I can't write as many words as I meant to write, or I can't film a video because I look really bad? Like, what then? What then? And then also, I think there's the physical optimization side of this too, where it's like, I have definitely internalized this idea that, well, I have to maintain a standard of appearance that I sometimes like definitely don't maintain. Like, I could absolutely imagine all sorts of people telling me all the ways in which I'm falling short. It's also the fear of consuming something that is not perfectly healthy. It's the fear of, again, going and drinking too much and gaining weight, or even worse, aging. Ultimately, what going out does is takes time away from all of the time required to maintain these standards of physical and intellectual perfection. And going back to the mainstreaming of loserdom essay, it seems that the idealization of being lazy is a reaction as well to this optimization culture. It's playing the same game where the only way to justify taking a step back from all of the demands of your life is to idealize it, to aestheticize it, to post it on social media. So that's one side of the fear. And then we come to the other side of the fear, which is more physical. It's like we have the intellectualized fear, and then we have the physical fear. It's the fear that going out and socializing could lead to dangerous situations. And now here, I think the best way I can describe this element of the fear is to include another fun personal anecdote from my time in New York. And so when I was living in New York, I think this was like in the immediate time post-pandemic, we were just kind of starting to reopen society a little bit. And sometimes my sister, who I lived with at the time, would go out with her friends. A perfectly innocent thing to do. I have done it as well. She would sometimes go to bars or maybe even to clubs with her friends. And every time this would happen, I would freak out. Now, I wouldn't reveal that I was freaking out until later in the night, but like I would kind of dread the days that she was going out where I'd be like, oh no, okay, like I know I'm going to have to worry about her the entire time that she's out. I'm going to have to like kind of like time my intervals of texting her so I can like basically be monitoring the fact that she is safe, that, you know, no one has like, I don't know, abducted her or spiked her drink, or just basically that she's okay, that there's not some creepy guy trying to take advantage of her. And it just like made me so nervous. If she like didn't text me back at a sufficient interval, or I felt like it was getting a little too late and she wasn't home yet, oh, I'd just be like this trembling mess. Like I would just be like, oh no, what's going to happen? Just sitting in my bed in this shivering panic, being like, oh no, oh no, oh no. When I rationalized it, in my past, I had done plenty more dangerous things than go out with my friends to a bar in New York City, like in Manhattan. Like I'd done way worse things. Like I had gone on like several Tinder dates in London with guys I'd never met before, just like to see what happened. It wasn't rational, but like in my kind of like isolated mind, I was consuming all of this media, and it did create the fear that the world is a very terrible place. I learned there's a name for this, as it turns out. It's called mean world syndrome, where through consuming media that portrays the world as a very dangerous or violent place, you develop a cognitive bias towards believing that the world is indeed as dangerous as the media, or as the media you're consuming might portray it to be. The world did seem like a more dangerous place than I had been before. I was, I think, more aware of what could happen. And because I was aware of what could happen, I started to almost believe that it would happen, that the worst was always going to happen. And I think that might have just also been part of the general vibe of the world then, because something bad had happened. Like we had been through this traumatic experience, and it did make the world seem scarier. As I was doing some research and I was looking up this mainstreaming of loserdom essay, I also found a Reddit thread about like, it was just people commenting on the article. And I did find one comment that really spoke, I think, to this way of perceiving society. Here's what this commenter said. I do think there's this weird slide into misanthropy that's happening. For example, people thinking it's weird the grocery store clerk was polite to them and asked about their day. Similar to my above point, it's like they don't understand social interaction that isn't filtered through screens and possibly find it hostile. Couple that with the conditions of outside becoming actually hostile, impatience, shorter tempers, increasing danger via cars, guns, etc., pets everywhere, expense, hostile architecture, loitering laws, law enforcement in general, depending on your demographic, and you get a perfect recipe for people deciding it's best, meaning safe, that they stay in and learn to like it. Even though all of my fears are completely unfounded, I have no reason to believe the world is more dangerous than it was before I developed these fears, even though I have no reason to believe that a single night out will destroy all of my progress on every goal I have. I still feel them, and there is still something of a logic to them, because we do live in a culture that demands that we be our absolute optimized best in order to succeed, in order to not even just succeed, in order to survive, in order to pay rent every month, to pay our ever increasing rent on our incredibly far-flung homes every month. And we do live in this culture where we're increasingly atomized and we're not looking out for each other. And if you go out to a bar or a club, you can't be convinced that people do really have your best interests at heart. And so as I think about all of this, it does make the inclination to just stay in make a little bit more sense. So, what is to be done? I mean, you didn't think I'd talk all about this without providing a solution. I mean, no, that's exactly the kind of thing I would do. Like, often I just talk about stuff and I'm like, yes, and it's horrible, but alas, this is the world we must accept. It is the world that we live in. But I actually do have a solution here to this one. And my solution is, let's bring back house parties. Like, please. Please. Because like when I think about my golden age of having a social life, and I mean, that golden age was beautiful. What was key to that was that there were many house parties. And in these house parties, you had so many opportunities to meet new people, to have sometimes interesting conversations, sometimes to have uninteresting conversations. I mean, sometimes you'd meet people you really don't like, but then that's still a story that you have for the future. You know, if you're like, oh my God, I met this really weird guy at this party, like, oh, it's fun. It's fun. But also the beauty of the house party is that I feel like it could be a great way to get out of this social fear. And in fact, a great way to create a culture of connectedness, togetherness. Now, next I'll be presenting my itemized list of why house parties are great and why they are the way of the future, with specific reference to the fear. Reason one, why parties are the best. You can drink as much or as little as you want. So if you're one of those people who's like, I want to keep it under control, that's great, because often you bring your own drinks to a house party, which gives you control over the health impacts of your socializing. And it also saves you money. Reason number two, why house parties are great. The attendees of your standard house party likely are members of the same extended social network, meaning that they're all more likely to have some degree of social tie, which I would say leads to increased trust in the social setting. Number three, if you meet someone at a house party who seems cool, there's a much higher likelihood that you can continue this bond, this relationship, because did I mention you're all kind of members of the same extended social network? So through your network, you could be like, hey, I met this cool person. Can I have their number? Do you know them? And you're much more likely to see them again. And also they're much more likely to want to see you again because you have context for knowing each other, leading to lasting social bonds. And now, even as I say this though, I can hear the naysayers coming. I can hear them say, oh, well, we live in these horrible apartments where there is no room for house parties. And didn't you hear that we all live far apart from each other? Who's going to want to travel that hour by train to go to a house party? And to which I say, well, you should just try it anyway, maybe. But then also I think that maybe In an ideal world, the dream would be that even before we bring back house parties, perhaps we just have to organize for better housing conditions, for shorter working hours. And with this, we can organize, we can meet new people through our community organizing, and then we can invite them to our parties.